Welcome to Dark Speak, where secrets never sleep, and the darkness always has something to say. 5 true stories of dreams that predict death. The shadow watching from the ceiling. This story haunted me throughout my childhood, lasting somewhere between 3 and 4 years. I don't remember exactly when I first had the semi-conscious nightmare, but it kept coming back, regularly every few months, as if something was deliberately pulling me into another world. In my sleep, I would often find myself lying in bed as usual, but the scary thing was that the view wasn't from my eyes. Instead, I would observe my room from the ceiling, as if my soul was separated from my body, hovering just above, looking down at me as I lay motionless. The feeling was both real and unreal, making my whole body freeze. I kept trying to swim, try to rush toward my body, but I couldn't move. The only thing I could do was turn my head, looking around the room in a helpless state. At first, I was just scared, but then as I got used to it, I began to notice strange details. The digital clock on the bedside table did not show the time in minutes as usual. It counted down, each cold second passing by as if signaling something terrible was about to happen. Every time the red light on the clock face dropped a number, my heart seemed to stop beating. Then the room began to change. On the blank walls appeared pieces of paper with scribbles, like children's crayon drawings. But I had never liked drawing, and I had never kept crayons in my room. Each drawing had the same image, a row of people holding hands, all smiling toward a small figure in the middle. That figure looked very familiar, and gradually I realized it was me. I clearly remember one night when the clock on the bedside table had only a few seconds left. All the characters in the painting turned their heads at the same time, looking straight up at me, who was floating on the ceiling. The smiles on their faces were distorted, twisted, stretched like tears. A cold air ran down my spine. At that moment, I was sucked back into my body. My whole body was shaking. I jumped up in panic, sweating profusely. I thought it was just a meaningless dream, but then something terrible happened. About a month later, a person living in the house next door died in his sleep for unknown reasons. That morning, when I ran out to the porch, I accidentally glanced at my room window. Behind the glass, there was an old piece of paper on which there were still faint crayon marks, a row of people holding hands, all smiling, looking towards a small figure. At that time, I did not dare to look closely to see if that figure still looked like me. But from then on, I understood that those dreams were not random. They herald death, like a dark warning from a world I cannot fully understand. In my semi-conscious state, besides a countdown clock and the strange paintings, there is another detail that always makes me shiver. It is a blue roof house that silently appears in the distance behind the window. I cannot remember its exact shape or structure, except that the dark blue tile roof shines as if reflecting the moonlight. In every painting hanging on the wall, people holding hands stand in front of that house. I do not know if the house is real or just a product of a dream, but that image is engraved in my memory like a strange reminder. There is also another detail, small but disturbing. It is an old toy train, the wooden kind with rusted metal wheels. I lost it many years ago, yet in my dreams it always lies alone on the bedroom floor. Every time I dream of it, the train was in a different place, as if someone had deliberately moved it. Although I want to believe that this was just a coincidence, the feeling of an invisible hand sending shivers down my spine. Often, after observing the room for a while, I would have an inexplicable urge, like a call from somewhere, to turn my head and look out the window. And every time, a figure appeared right in front of me. He stood close to the window, just far enough away for his breath to linger on the glass. He had short, white hair, a haggard face with a long gash on his left temple, a wound that looked both old and painful. He would stand there for only a few seconds at a time, staring at me lie on the bed, as if to confirm that I was still there. Then he would start scratching at the window, his skinny fingers making a dry, persistent sound, as if trying to pry the window open and crawl inside. Usually that was a moment I woke up with a start, cold sweat soaking my back. Some nights I would jump up and rush to the window, my heart pounding as if it were about to explode. But outside there was only silence and darkness and an empty yard. Some nights I was so scared that I couldn't move, lying still until I regained my courage. Either way, I kept checking, looking for a trace, a scratch on the wooden frame, a fingernail print, or at least some moisture from his hands. But there was never anything. Everything was clean, cold, as if no one had ever touched it. When it happened 4 times, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to tell my parents. I remember my mother's face. She just sighed and calmly explained that recurring dreams were not uncommon, especially for a child my age. My father intervened, his voice low, saying that their room was only a wall away, and that if I got scared, I should call. I nodded, pretending that those words of comfort were enough to calm me. But deep down, I knew they didn't change anything. For the figure, with silver hair and cut temple, kept returning night after night, waiting patiently by the window like a death watcher. Although my father took me by the hand and led me outside the house to check, the result only made me more confused. We found no sign of the stranger, no footprints on the damp ground, no smudges on glass, no evidence that anyone had stood outside the window the night before. For adults, that was a comfort. But for me, that emptiness was even more terrifying. It was like a ghost that could appear anywhere without leaving a trace. The following months passed in a quiet tension. Every 3 months, that nightmare returned once, not insistently, not often, but enough to remind me that it had not disappeared. I was young, but I understood that the repetition of the same dream could not be a coincidence. The 4th time, they stopped abruptly, as if an invisible hand had pressed pause. For 6 months, I was free. No more countdown clocks, no more drawings, no more scratching at the window. The fear was slowly buried in my memory, a part of my childhood memories that would fade with time. Until that fateful night, I dreamed of that room again. Everything was the same. The red clock glowing with each second, the wooden train in the wrong place, the strange drawings and the green roof house looming outside the window. Everything was happening in a familiar order, making me think for a moment that I could control this dream. But then, when I glanced at the window, I was shocked. It was open. There was no warning sound, no slow movement. My bedroom window was wide open, as if someone had just entered and was still present somewhere in the room. At that moment, I woke up, but the fear was not over. I couldn't move. My body felt like it was tied to the mattress, my eyelids heavy, my throat tight. I was aware of every second that passed, my brain screaming at me to get up and check the window. But no matter how hard I tried, my limbs remained immobile. A chill permeated the room, as if a night wind was rushing straight through the open window. Goosebumps rose on my skin. I knew for sure that if someone was standing outside, in a few seconds they would climb in and touch me. Those 5 minutes felt like a lifetime. I had never experienced such a terrible terror. My entire mind was focused on the image of the silver-haired man with the gash on his temple, standing at the edge of the bed, just an arm's reach away. I could almost hear his heavy breathing, the cold metallic scent lingering in my nostrils. When my body finally obeyed, I jumped up and ran straight to the window. It was closed, the bolt still fastened, as silent as if it had never been touched. But that fact did not bring me any relief. On the contrary, it engraved in my heart a terrifying belief. That dream was no longer a dream. It was intruding into reality. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat huddled in the corner of the room until the first light of dawn crept in. And from that night on, every time I closed my eyes, I was mentally prepared that the nightmare would return at any moment. I never allowed myself to be fooled again. I used to think that if I kept that dream in my mind, mentally prepared myself, then when it returned, I would be less afraid. Surprisingly, it worked. The next time I saw it again, I was no longer shaking like before, and even after waking up, I didn't bother to run to the window to check. By the 3rd time, the fear had almost disappeared, leaving only a vague feeling of obsession, making me want to tell my parents again. Maybe because I was older, or because I described it in more detail. This time my parents paid attention to every word I said. I tried to tell it as specifically as possible, not missing any details. When I got to the part about the silver-haired man with the gash on his temple, I saw my parents change their expressions. Not clearly, but enough for me to notice the tension in their eyes. As soon as I mentioned the gash, my father interrupted, asking me if I was sure about that detail. I insisted that I remembered it clearly. He immediately turned to look at my mother, whose gaze contained something they didn't want me to know. I pressed them, but they both just assured me that everything was fine. I didn't want to embarrass my parents, so I stopped. But from that moment on, I understood that there was another layer of mystery hidden behind my nightmare. A few days later, they took the initiative to sit down with me. It wasn't a dramatic confession like in the movies, but a story told softly, intermittently, as if they had been hesitating for a long time. My mother was the one who talked the most. She told me that when I was a child, not yet able to remember or call out my name, there was a man who often came to the house. His name was Darian. They called him Uncle Darian, so I wouldn't feel like a stranger, even though he wasn't really a relative. He had been my father's best friend since college. Darian was a regular presence in my early years. He helped look after me when my parents were at work. I was too young to remember him, but my mother said he would carry me out into the garden, sitting for hours on the wooden steps in the sunset. Then something happened. A big fallout that made my father swear off the relationship forever. He forbade Darian to ever come near the family again, especially me. That was all my father said, without revealing the reason. I asked, but they just shook their heads, insisting that it had nothing to do with me, that I shouldn't worry. But in my heart, a doubt grew, because the man in the dream, the man standing by the window, his white hair, the deep gash on his temple, seemed to be the reflection of the man who had carried me on the steps. I began to wonder, if Darian had been banished by my father long ago, why did his shadow still come to me in my dreams? Was there something left unsaid? Or had he never left, but was just waiting for a chance to return? The only thing my parents would admit, and it was a detail that made me sick, was that Darian had a distinct scar on his temple left from a car accident years before I was born. They didn't say it outright, nor did they put the pieces together into a complete picture, but they didn't need to. I was old enough to connect the dots. The man standing by the window in the dream was him. That night, after my mother went to bed, my father lingered in the living room with me. He sat in the dim yellow light, so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I knew he wanted to say more, as if he wasn't satisfied with what he had said. After a few moments of hesitation, he spoke. Dad said that maybe the dreams were just my brain's way of processing something buried deep inside, memories from my childhood, when I couldn't yet form sentences, but could feel and attach to someone. He mentioned Darian, how I used to cling to him, how I used to cry when Darian left the house, how I would only go to bed if he read me a story. Dad said he couldn't think of any other reason why I would know about the scar, unless the memory had never really gone. I was silent, not knowing how to react. I had no memory of Darian. Even now, when I close my eyes and try to dig into every corner of my memory, I still cannot picture his face outside the image in my dreams. The only thing that is clearly visible is a long, shiny scar on his left temple, deeply imprinted like an indelible mark. In the days that followed, I tried to carry on with my life as usual, regardless of whether the dream returned or not. A few more months passed, then several more weeks. It's hard to remember exactly how long the dream lasted, but I'm sure it became less frequent. Maybe twice a year, maybe even just once. But each time it returned, I'd find myself lying in bed, looking down at myself from above, the room filled with unusual details. The countdown clock, the strange paintings, the out-of-place wooden train, the distant green-roofed house. And as if by some inescapable rule, the figure of that man would stand outside the window, his skinny fingers scratching at the glass, waiting for me. When I woke up, I was left with only a feeling of exhaustion, and a question that had never been answered. If Darian had been banished, if he had really disappeared from my life when I was too young to remember, why did his figure still come to me in my dreams? Were there ties that never broke, even after people had left? Or was it that what I saw in my dreams was no longer a memory, but a spirit that patiently waited outside the window, trying to find a way to return to me, regardless of time? Things became much darker as my fourth year progressed. One night, after waking up from a familiar dream, I glanced toward the window out of habit, and this time I actually saw something move. It was just a flash, but I was sure something had just lurked just outside the glass. All the fear I had tried to suppress for so many years came flooding back, even more violently than before. I jumped out of bed, screaming for my parents. They rushed over immediately. My father ran out barefoot, and my mother held me tight, keeping me from shaking and fainting. A few minutes later, my father returned, his face tense. He whispered something in my mother's ear, then told me to stay in their room. They said they would call the police. I huddled in the corner of my bed, but strangely enough, I didn't hear any sirens or see anyone other than my parents that night. The next morning, my father confessed that he had seen faint footprints right under my window. I immediately asked if it was Darian. He shook his head, saying that it couldn't be, since we had moved long ago and Darian had never known where we were. My father promised that nothing bad would happen again, and strangely enough, he was right. I never had that dream again that night. My parents rarely mentioned it, and I understood why. Every time I tried to ask, they just kept quiet, avoiding me, making me gradually give up on finding answers. But there was one thought that always haunted me, making my stomach churn every time I thought about it. Was it possible that during all those years of nightmares, there was really someone standing outside the window silently watching me? Was it reasonable that someone had been watching me for 4 years? The question kept nagging at me, and I couldn't decide what was scarier, that it was really Darian or just some stranger that my mind had attached to him. Maybe a sound, a small vibration in real life had crept into my consciousness, then transformed into a dream. But what made me shiver the most was the certainty that my parents had never called the police that night, no matter what they told me. It was an empty peace, and perhaps I would never find the answer for the rest of my life. To cope with nightmares, I've developed a strange offense, falling asleep to sound. Sometimes with a recorded rain shower, sometimes a podcast about the cosmos, sometimes just the wind whistling through my headphones. This habit makes my dreams more predictable, less terrifying. For example, if I fall asleep to a football replay, I'll dream about the field instead of faceless figures standing outside my window. But a few weeks ago, at a sleepover at my friend Duncan's house, everything changed. That night, there were only 3 of us, Duncan, Ian, and me. Duncan's parents were away, so the house was empty and uncomfortably quiet. We pulled the sofa into the living room to sleep, expecting a fun and noisy night. Instead, that night, I had one of the strangest and most vivid dreams I've ever had. In it, I found myself floating on a small sailboat out at sea. I had never been on a boat before, but the feeling was terrifyingly real. The water was not calm. It swirled as if angry, and the sky above was a patchwork of deep purple and ash gray. The wind howled in gusts, blowing past my ears like a distant scream. Then the boat suddenly lurched. I couldn't see what hit it, but the whole boat shook, as if something huge had just swept past below. There was a cracking sound, cracks opened between floorboards, and I had the distinct feeling that a hand or claw was trying to break through the wood from below. Duncan rubbed his eyes, and when he saw my panicked expression, he sobered up. I whispered about the sound of running water upstairs and the open bathroom door, tried to emphasize that something was wrong. Ian was still fast asleep on the sofa, oblivious. Duncan frowned, standing up immediately. We had no weapons, just 2 half-asleep kids, but the unnatural silence of the house made us both feel compelled to act. He gestured for me to follow, while he gripped a small baseball bat that was still propped up in the corner of the living room. We climbed the stairs, the sound of the water more distinct this time, as if the water was calling for attention. As we approached the upstairs hallway, I felt a chill in the air, an eerie dampness that seemed to be coming from the room itself. The bathroom door was ajar, a yellow light shining from the light bulb inside. The sound of water hitting the sink formed an odd rhythm, regular as a knock. Duncan slowly reached out to push the door wider, but at that moment, the water suddenly stopped. The unnatural silence made my heart stop. There was no sound, only the sound of our heavy breathing echoing in the dark hallway. Duncan tightened his grip on the cane, whispering that the faucet might have turned itself off. But we both knew that was nonsense. Then, from behind the white shower curtain came a soft sound, like fingernails scratching porcelain. I could feel a shiver running down my spine. Duncan turned to look at me. eyes wide, and neither of us dared to take another step. Finally, survival instincts took over. Duncan grabbed my hand and pulled me down the stairs. We rushed straight to the living room, where Ian was still fast asleep, and turned on all the lights in the house. But as the light flooded in, the sound disappeared as if it had never existed. In a panic, I turned to look at the clock on the wall in the living room. The second hand was still running normally, but the clock face was imprinted with tiny watermarks, as if someone had just touched it with a wet hand. That night, the atmosphere in the neighborhood where Bonnie lived was suspiciously quiet. The houses were close together, looking like they were built from a mold. When the clock was approaching 10 o'clock, all the lights in the neighborhood gradually went out, leaving only a few flickering street lamps, making the whole neighborhood cold like a forgotten painting. Bonnie and I sat in the living room, trying to enjoy the rare freedom without her parents watching. We ate snacks, watched movies, and laughed, but deep down I was still haunted by the Duncan incident. Every little sound from outside, the wind blowing through cracks in the door, the rattling of branches against the window, made me alert. As soon as the movie ended, Bonnie suggested going up to her bedroom to rest. Bonnie's second-floor room looked normal at first. Pale walls, a desk by the window, a small bookshelf in the corner. But when I walked in, I could clearly feel a heavy layer of air. It wasn't my imagination. There was a musty smell, as if someone had opened the door to the dungeon below. Bonnie reassured me that this old house sometimes had strange smells. She turned on the nightlight, and we lay in bed talking for a while. The ticking of the alarm clock next to the bed gradually lulled us to sleep. I remember drifting off into a dream, but then a sound, clear, slow, unmistakable, footsteps in the second-floor hallway, soft but sure, as if someone was deliberately walking very quietly. I turned to Bonnie. Her face was hard, her eyes wide, indicating that she had heard it too. The footsteps stopped right in front of the bedroom door. No knock, no other movement, just suffocating silence. I swallowed, trying to listen to my racing heartbeat. Bonnie whispered to me if I had locked the door. I couldn't answer. My mind was blank, only a sense of dread spreading through me. I stood frozen in my dream, eyes still fixed on that thin yellow light. It was like a thin line between safety and something terrible waiting on the other side. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't hear Bonnie's breathing. The familiar ticking of the alarm clock, just a heavy silence pressing down on my ears. Then, suddenly, a thick darkness slowly slid to the crack of the door, blocking the light. It was as if someone or something was standing motionless just outside, blocking out the remaining light. I wanted to scream for Bonnie, to jump up, but my whole body was stiff. It was as if my entire body was pinned to the bed by an invisible force. A whisper rang out, sounding like it was coming from far away, but it was so clear it was terrifying. It wasn't Bonnie's voice. It wasn't the voice I'd heard. It was soft, cold, emphasizing each word slowly. I found it. I panicked, tried to struggle, but the dream held me back like an invisible trap. Just when I thought I was about to suffocate, the light burst out. I opened my eyes, back to reality. Bonnie was still lying next to me, breathing steadily as if nothing had happened. The bedroom was silent. There was no darkness creeping to the crack of the door, no strange streak of light. I told myself it was just a nightmare. But then I heard it for real this time. Footsteps in the hallway on the second floor. Heavy, slow, no longer vague. I lay still, eyes wide open in the pitch blackness, cold sweat pouring down my body. My chest heaved. Tried to catch my breath, but unable to regain a normal rhythm. I glanced around the room. Everything was exactly as we'd fallen asleep. The curtains were half closed, the desk lamp was off, and Bonnie was still sleeping beside me. Everything was normal, so normal that it was unnatural. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a series of nightmares. But then, in the absolute silence, a faint sound came from the end of the hallway. Not footsteps this time, but laughter, weak, incoherent, echoing as if from deep within the walls. I sat up, my heart pounding in my throat. The laughter lasted for a few seconds, then stopped, leaving a dead silence that made me feel even more suffocated. I glanced at Bonnie. still sleeping soundly, not even waking up. It felt like I was the only one dragged into this vicious attack. I clutched the corner of the blanket, my hands shaking, and for the first time I noticed a chilling detail. The yellow light under the bedroom door had disappeared, not because the light was off, but because it was completely dark outside in the hallway, so dark that you couldn't even see the edge of the door. I knew that this wasn't the normal state of the house. Something had swallowed the light, like a living darkness, creeping right up to the door. I forced myself to turn away, closing my eyes tightly, hoping that when I opened them again, they would disappear. But in that moment, once again, the woman's voice whispered close to my ear, right on my pillow, no longer distant. "You will never escape." I woke up and turned on the nightlight, but the room was empty. No one was there. There was no sign that the door had ever opened or that anything had happened. There was only the sound of my heart pounding and the shadows of dream and reality blending together. Impossible to tell which was real. I could accept that my brain had woven the fragments of reality into a nightmare, but what I couldn't get over was the detail of the yellow light under the door. How could an image that had appeared so clearly in my dream match the scene I saw when I opened my eyes? I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, a trick of my half-awake mind. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. It was as if something or someone was deliberately warning me. In the days that followed, I often had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I feared that the light would appear under the door again. I began to examine the details of the dream. The voices, the footsteps, the constant repetition. It wasn't like a normal nightmare. It was like a scripted scenario, some kind of ritual that repeated itself over and over again until I opened my eyes and looked at it. Bonnie was different. She tried to soothe me, telling me that we were lucky the police got there in time, that the dream was just a reflection of my subconscious fears. But I could see it in her eyes, a flicker of panic that she didn't dare put into words. Perhaps she knew, too, that night wasn't just a break-in. One night, as I was about to fall asleep after days of exhaustion, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. Just one sentence, as clear as if someone were standing right at the head of my bed. "You will see me again." I jerked awake. The room was still silent. Bonnie was still sleeping, but I knew for sure that it was no longer a dream. I began to realize that it wasn't the footsteps, the voices, or the intrusion that were scaring me. The scariest thing was that thin strip of yellow light, always there in my mind, whether my eyes were open or closed. It wasn't limited to dreams or reality. It was a persistent shadow, always hovering in front of me, watching my every thought. Bonnie tried to comfort me, saying that it was just a memory my brain had blown up, a temporary haunting image. But I knew this was different from normal memories. The strip of light didn't disappear when I woke up, didn't fade over time. It was there, a bright yellow outline, a reminder of the fear I'd felt. I tried everything. Reading, listening to music, playing games, even go outside, trying to fill my mind with ordinary things. But it was still there, subtle but sure, always in the corner of my mind. Not to block my vision or take over my dreams, but to remind me that what I've been through isn't over. Part of me still hopes that one day it will fade, vanish like the hauntings of my childhood. But the other part, deep down, fears that the streak of light has been imprinted on my consciousness. Forever a part of me, a creepy reminder that sometimes what we think is over is just the beginning. Over the years, the protagonist has had strange, semi-lucid dreams in which a mysterious man appears at his window, along with creepy images and details of his bedroom. As he grows older, memories of a man named Brian and the scar on his forehead reveal a deep connection to his past. Those dreams become more vivid and creepy, even spilling over into real life, as when a character and his friends witness a real break-in. But the strangest detail is still the yellow light under the door, something that appeared in the dream and is now deeply imprinted in the mind, not fading, reminding that the fear has never ended. Is that light just a psychological obsession, or is there something really watching the main character? The unsolved mystery will continue in the next part, when the boundary between dreams and reality becomes increasingly fragile. The story ends here. Goodbye and see you again in the next video.